Hello and welcome to Marple's Mind, where every story feels like a conversation. Over a warm cup of coffee today, I bring you a brand new Miss Marple. Mystery filled with twists, clues, and clever deductions. Make yourself comfortable and let's unravel the case together, and if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in. From now, let's get started. Miss Marple's roses were red, and so was the blood on her hands. Chapter 1. A Stain Among the Roses. The morning sun cast a golden glow over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in hues of warmth and tranquillity. Miss Marple, as was her custom, stepped into her beloved rose garden, pruning shears in hand. The air was thick with the scent of blooming roses, their crimson petals glistening with dew. She hummed softly to herself, her keen eyes scanning the bushes for any signs of neglect. It was then that she noticed it. A faint coppery smell mingling with the floral fragrance. Frowning, she knelt beside the bush of crimson glory roses, her gaze drawn to a peculiar dark stain on the soil. At first glance, it could have been mistaken for spilled tea or fertilizer, but Miss Marple knew better. She reached out, her gloved fingers brushing the damp earth. The stain was sticky, almost metallic. "How very odd," she murmured, tilting her head. Her sharp eyes caught a glint of something beneath the bush. Carefully, she parted the thorny branches and retrieved a blood-stained glove. A man's glove, by the look of it, made of fine leather. The fingers were stiff with dried blood, and a faint scent of cologne lingered on the fabric. Miss Marple's mind raced. This was no ordinary gardening mishap. The glove was too expensive for a labourer, and the blood suggested something far more sinister than a cut finger. She glanced around the garden, her gaze lingering on the freshly turned soil near the garden gate. Had someone been here last night? She straightened, her expression calm, but her thoughts churning. The village of St. Mary Mead was not known for violent crimes, but Miss Marple had long since learned that even the most idyllic places could hide dark secrets. Pocketing the glove, she made her way to the garden gate, her steps deliberate. She reached the lane. She spotted young Tommy Pierce, the vicar's nephew, cycling past. "Tommy!" she called, her voice gentle but firm. The boy skidded to a halt, his freckled face breaking into a grin. "Morning, Miss Marple. Lovely day, isn't it?" "Indeed," she replied, her tone thoughtful. "Tell me, have you seen Mr. Hargreaves this morning? He was supposed to tend to the roses today, but he hasn't arrived." Tommy's grin faded. "Mr. Hargreaves? No, ma'am. Haven't seen him since yesterday. He was acting a bit strange, though. Kept looking over, his shoulder like someone was following him." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly. "Was he now? How peculiar. Thank you, Tommy. Do let me know if you see him." As the boy cycled away, Miss Marple's mind turned over the new information. Mr. Hargreaves, the village gardener, was a quiet, unassuming man, not the type to attract trouble. But if he had been acting strangely, and now this blood-stained glove— She glanced back at her rose garden, the crimson glory bushes swaying gently in the breeze. The red petals seemed almost too vibrant, as if mocking the darkness lurking beneath. Their beauty? "Well," she said softly to herself, "it seems my roses have more to tell me than I thought." With that, She turned and walked briskly toward the village, her mind already piecing together the first threads of the mystery. The glove, the blood, the missing gardener. It was all connected, she was sure of it. And if there was one thing Miss Marple knew, it was that secrets like roses had thorns. Chapter 2. The Vanishing Gardener. The village square was unusually lively for a Tuesday morning. A cluster of villagers stood near the post office, their voices hushed but urgent. Miss Marple approached with her customary calm, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. Mrs. Price Ridley, the village's most notorious gossip, was at the centre of the group, her hat slightly askew as she gestured animatedly. "Good morning," Miss Marple said, her tone polite but firm enough to draw their attention. "Is something the matter?" Mrs. Price Ridley turned, her eyes widening. "Oh, Miss Marple, you haven't heard? Mr. Hargreaves has gone missing. No one's seen him since yesterday evening. And now this." She thrust a crumpled piece of paper into Miss Marple's hands. It was a note, hastily scrawled in uneven handwriting. "Stay out of the garden. Some things are better left buried." Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her mind was racing. The note's warning echoed the blood-stained glove she had discovered earlier. She folded the paper neatly and handed it back. "Where was this found?" "In his tool shed," replied Mr. Calthorpe, the postmaster. "I went to fetch him for a delivery this morning, but the shed was empty. Just this note on his workbench, and his tools scattered everywhere. Very unlike him, I must say." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed, Mr. Hargreaves is a meticulous man. This is most out of character." She excused herself from the group and made her way to the gardener's tool shed, located at the edge of the village green. The shed was a small, weathered structure, its wooden panels warped with age. The door hung slightly ajar, creaking in the breeze. Inside, the scene was as Mr. Calthorpe had described. Tools lay strewn across the floor. A spade, a pair of shears, a trowel, as if someone had rummaged through them in haste. Miss Marple's gaze fell on the workbench. A single red rose lay atop it, its petals fresh, but its stem snapped cleanly, as if plucked in anger. She picked up the rose, her fingers brushing against a faint smudge of dirt on the bench. Kneeling, she examined the floor more closely. The scattered tools. She noticed a set of muddy footprints leading toward the back of the shed. The prints were large, likely belonging to a man, but the tread was unfamiliar. Not the worn boots Mr. Hargreaves usually wore. Her eyes narrowed as she spotted something glinting beneath the workbench. Reaching for it, she retrieved a small silver key. It was ornate, with an intricate design etched into the bow, a key that didn't belong to any ordinary lock. "Curious," she murmured, slipping the key into her pocket. As she stepped out of the shed, she noticed a patch of disturbed earth near the back fence. The soil had been recently turned, but no plants had been planted. Kneeling, she brushed away the loose dirt, revealing a shallow hole. Inside was a crumpled handkerchief, stained with what appeared to be blood. Miss Marple's lips pursed. The pieces were beginning to form a picture, but it was still unclear. Who had been in the shed? What were they searching for? And where was Mr. Hargreaves? She straightened, brushing the dirt from her gloves. As she did, a movement caught her eye, a figure slipping behind the hedgerow at the edge of the green. She couldn't make out their face, but she noted the slight limp in their gait. Interesting, she said softly. Chapter 3. Tea and Trouble at the Vicarage. The vicarage was a picture of quiet charm. Its ivy-covered walls and neatly trimmed hedges exuding an air of timeless serenity. Miss Marple approached the front door, her basket of freshly baked scones in hand. She had always found that a small offering of baked goods opened doors, both literal and figurative, in St. Mary Mead. The vicar's wife, Mrs. Clement, greeted her with a warm smile. "Miss Marple, what a delightful surprise! Do come in." The sitting-room was cosy, with sunlight streaming through the lace curtains, and the faint scent of lavender in the air. Miss Marple settled into her usual chair, her eyes taking in the room's details. The slightly crooked portrait of the vicar's late father, the stack of unopened letters on the side table, and the faint scuff marks near the doorway. "I brought some scones," Miss Marple said, placing the basket on the table. "I thought you might enjoy them with your tea." "How kind of you," Mrs. Clement replied, bustling about with the teapot, "though I must admit I've been rather distracted today. Have you heard about Mr. Hargreaves? Such a peculiar business." "I have," Miss Marple said, her tone mild. "It's most unlike him to disappear without a word. I was hoping you might have some insight." Mrs. Clement hesitated, her hand pausing mid-pour. "Well, it's probably nothing, but he did seem rather troubled the last time he was here. He came to speak with the vicar about something private, I gather. They shut themselves in the study for nearly an hour." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Did they? How unusual! Did Mr. Hargreaves say anything afterward?" "Not to me," Mrs. Clement said, setting the teapot down. "But I did overhear him muttering something about secrets buried in the garden as he left. I thought it was just his way of speaking. You know how poetic gardeners can be. But now, with him gone—" Miss Marple sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Secrets buried in the garden. How very intriguing." The conversation turned to more mundane matters, but Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere. When Mrs. Clement excused herself to fetch more milk, Miss Marple seized the opportunity. She rose quietly and made her way to the study, her footsteps soundless on the thick carpet. The study was dimly lit, its shelves lined with dusty theological tomes and stacks of parish records. Miss Marple's gaze fell on the vicar's desk, where a leather-bound ledger lay open. She scanned the entries, her sharp eyes catching a recent notation. "Meeting with Hargreaves. Family matter." Before she could read further, the sound of footsteps in the hallway sent her gliding back to her seat. Mrs. Clement returned, none the wiser, and the conversation resumed as if nothing had happened. As Miss Marple prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Oh, one more thing. Did Mr. Hargreaves mention anything about a key? A small silver key, perhaps?" Mrs. Clement frowned. "A key? No, I don't believe so. Why do you ask?" "Just a thought," Miss Marple said with a gentle smile. "Thank you for the tea, my dear. Do let me know if you hear anything more about Mr. Hargreaves." Chapter 4. The Letter That Never Arrived. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Miss Marple's cottage as she sat by the window, her knitting needles clicking softly. Her mind, however, was far from the half-finished scarf in her hands. Events of the day swirled in her thoughts like leaves caught in a gust of wind, each clue a piece of a puzzle she was determined to solve. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. She set her knitting aside and opened the door to find young Tommy Pierce standing on the step, his cheeks flushed from running. "Miss Marple!" he gasped, holding out an envelope. "This came for you. The postmistress said it was urgent." Miss Marple took the envelope, her brow furrowing slightly. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the letters uneven and hastily scrawled. "Thank you. Tommy, would you like a biscuit before you go?" The boy's eyes lit up, and he followed her inside, eagerly accepting a ginger snap from the tin on the table. Miss Marple waited until he had left before opening the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the message brief and to the point. "Stop digging. Some secrets are best left buried." Miss Marple's lips pursed. The warning was clear, but it only strengthened her resolve. She examined the envelope more closely, noting the postmark. It had been sent from the village post office that very morning. "Curious," she murmured. "Someone is watching me." She tucked the letter into her pocket and reached for her hat and gloves. If someone was trying to intimidate her, they clearly didn't know Jane Marple very well. Her first stop was the post office. The postmistress, Mrs. Treadway, was behind the counter, sorting through a stack of parcels. She looked up as Miss Marple entered, her expression polite but guarded. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Treadway," Miss Marple said, her tone cheerful. "I received a rather peculiar letter this morning. I was wondering if you might recall who sent it." Mrs. Treadway adjusted her spectacles and took the envelope Miss Marple handed her. I don't recall this one specifically, but we've been quite busy today. It could have been anyone." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes scanning the small shop. "Of course. It's just that the handwriting is so distinctive, almost as if the person was in a hurry. You wouldn't happen to have any recent orders for stationery, would you? Someone purchasing envelopes or paper, perhaps?" Mrs. Treadway hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I'm afraid not. But if I think of anything, I'll let you know." Miss Marple thanked her and left, her mind working overtime. The letter had been sent from the village, which meant the sender was close, perhaps even someone she knew. As she walked down the lane, she noticed a figure ducking into the alley beside the butcher's shop. It was the same slight limp she had seen earlier near the tool shed. Quickening her pace, she turned the corner, but the alley was empty. Her gaze fell on a scrap of paper caught in the gutter. She picked it up, smoothing out the creases. It was a torn receipt from the florist, dated the previous day. The item listed was a bouquet of red roses, paid for in cash. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Red roses, just like the one left in Mr. Hargreaves's shed. She tucked the receipt into her pocket and continued on her way, her steps purposeful. Chapter 5. A Rose by Any Other Name. The florist's shop, Blossoms and Buds, was a quaint little establishment nestled between the bakery and the haberdashery. Its window display was a riot of colour. Daffodils, tulips, and, of course, roses. Miss Marple pushed open the door, the tinkling of the bell announcing her arrival. The shop's owner, Miss Emily Trent, was arranging a bouquet behind the counter. She looked up, her face lighting up with a smile. "Miss Marple, what a pleasant surprise! How can I help you today?" "Good afternoon, Miss Trent," Miss Marple replied, returning the smile. "I was wondering if you could assist me with a small matter. I've come across a receipt for a bouquet of red roses, and I'm trying to trace the purchaser. It's rather important." Miss Trent's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, I see. Well, we do sell quite a lot of roses, especially this time of year. Do you have the receipt with you?" Miss Marple handed over the torn piece of paper. Miss Trent examined it, her brow furrowing. "This is from yesterday. Let me check the ledger." She pulled out a large leather-bound book and flipped through the pages. "Ah, here it is. 1 bouquet of red roses, paid for in cash. No name, I'm afraid." Miss Marple leaned in slightly. "Do you recall who purchased it? Perhaps someone you didn't recognize?" Miss Trent hesitated, her fingers tapping nervously on the counter. "Well, there was a gentleman. He seemed in a hurry, and he paid with cash. He didn't say much, but I remember he had a slight limp." Miss Marple's eyes sparkled with interest. "A limp, you say? How very curious. Did you notice anything else about him?" Miss Trent thought for a moment. He was wearing a hat pulled low over his face, and his voice, it was soft, almost hesitant. He seemed nervous now that I think about it. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Miss Trent. You've been most helpful." As she left the shop, her mind was abuzz with possibilities. The man with the limp had purchased red roses. The same roses left in Mr. Hargreaves's shed. Was he the same person she had seen near the tool shed and the butcher's shop? And what was his connection to the missing gardener? Her next stop was the churchyard. The ancient headstones stood in silent rows, their inscriptions weathered by time. Miss Marple made her way to the far corner, where a patch of freshly turned earth caught her eye. Kneeling, she brushed away the loose soil, revealing a small metal box. She opened it carefully, her breath catching as she saw the contents. A stack of old letters, tied with a faded ribbon, and a photograph of a young couple. The woman was unfamiliar, but the man, despite the passage of time, was unmistakably Mr. Hargreaves. Miss Marple's fingers trembled slightly as she untied the ribbon and unfolded the top letter. The handwriting was elegant, the words filled with longing and regret. It was a love letter, written decades ago, but the emotions were as fresh as if they had been penned yesterday. "Well, well," she murmured. "It seems Mr. Hargreaves had a secret after all." Chapter 6. The Midnight Visitor. The shadow among the headstones vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Miss Marple standing alone in the quiet churchyard. She adjusted her hat, her sharp eyes scanning the area for any further movement, but the figure was gone. The only sound was the rustle of leaves in the breeze and the distant chirping of sparrows. She made her way back to her cottage, her mind racing. The letters she had found in the metal box were tucked safely in her bag, their contents hinting at a story far more complex than she had anticipated. Mr. Hargreaves, it seemed, had been a man with a past someone was desperate to keep hidden. That evening, as the village settled into its usual quiet, Miss Marple sat by the fire, the letters spread out on her lap. The photograph of the young couple lay beside her, its edges worn with age. The woman in the picture was strikingly beautiful, her smile radiant, while Mr. Hargreaves looked younger, happier, and far removed from the quiet gardener she had known. The letters spoke of a love affair, one that had ended abruptly and tragically. The woman whose name was Eleanor, had written of her family's disapproval and the pressures that had driven them apart. The final letter was particularly poignant. "My dearest Thomas, I cannot bear the thought of a life without you, but my family will never allow it. They have arranged a marriage for me, and I am powerless to refuse. Please do not think ill of me. My heart will always be yours." Miss Marple sighed, setting the letter aside. It was a tale as old as time, love thwarted by circumstance. But how did it connect to the present? And why had these letters been buried in the churchyard, only to resurface now? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Startled, she glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. "Who could that be at this hour?" she murmured, rising from her chair. She opened the door to find no one there. The lane was empty, the moonlight casting long shadows across the cobblestones. But on the doorstep lay a single red rose, its petals dark as blood. Miss Marple picked it up, her fingers brushing against a small note tied to the stem. It read, "You should have heeded the warning." Her heart quickened, but her expression remained calm. She stepped outside, her gaze sweeping the lane. There was no sign of the visitor, but she noticed a faint set of footprints in the damp earth, near her rose bushes. The tread was uneven, a slight limp perhaps. She returned inside, locking the door behind her. The rose and the note were clear messages. Someone was watching her, and they were growing bolder. Chapter 7. Secrets in the Soil. The St. Mary Mead archives were housed in a small, dusty room above the village library. Miss Marple arrived early, her bag containing the letters and photograph tucked securely under her arm. The librarian, Mr. Pemberton, greeted her with a nod, his spectacles perched precariously on the bridge of his nose. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice tinged with curiosity, "what brings you here so early? Researching the history of rose cultivation, perhaps?" "Shh, quite," she replied with a gentle smile. "I'm looking for information about a family that lived here many years ago. The name was Eleanor Grayson. Do you recall the name?" Mr. Pemberton's eyebrows shot up. "Grayson? Goodness, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. The Graysons were one of the wealthiest families in the area, but they left St. Mary Mead decades ago. Let me see what I can find." He led her to a shelf lined with old ledgers and yellowed newspapers. After a few minutes of searching, he pulled out a leather-bound volume titled Local Families of Note, 1890–1920. "Here we are," he said, opening the book to a page marked with a faded ribbon. "The Graysons. Eleanor was the youngest, daughter. There's a photograph here somewhere." He flipped through the pages until he found a grainy photograph of the Grayson family. Eleanor stood at the edge of the group, her beauty unmistakable even in the faded image. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed as she noticed a man standing slightly apart from the family. A servant, perhaps, but his face was turned away. "Do you know what became of her?" Miss Marple asked. Mr. Pemberton sighed. "It's a sad story, really. Eleanor was engaged to a man from a prominent family, but the marriage never happened. She disappeared shortly before the wedding, and the family left the village soon after. There were rumours, of course, scandalous ones, but nothing was ever proven." Miss Marple's mind raced. The letters she had found suggested that Eleanor and Mr. Hargreaves, Thomas, had been deeply in love? Had their affair led to her disappearance? And what had become of her? "Thank you, Mr. Pemberton," she said, closing the book. "You've been most helpful." As she left the library, her thoughts were a whirl of possibilities. The Graysons' departure, Eleanor's disappearance, and Mr. Hargreaves's quiet life as a gardener. It all pointed to a secret that had been buried for decades, but secrets, like roses, had a way of pushing through the soil, no matter how deeply they were planted. Chapter 8. The Locket's Tale. The vicarage was quiet when Miss Marple arrived, the only sound the distant chirping of birds in the garden. She knocked lightly on the door, and after a moment the vicar himself answered, his kind face lighting up with a smile. "Miss Marple, what a pleasant surprise! Do come in." She followed him into the cosy sitting-room, where a fire crackled in the hearth. Mrs. Clement was nowhere to be seen, and Miss Marple suspected the vicar was enjoying a rare moment of solitude. "I won't take much of your time," she began, settling into a chair. "I've been looking into a matter that may require your insight. It concerns the Grayson family, Eleanor Grayson, to be precise." The vicar's smile faded, replaced by a look of mild concern. "Ah, yes, the Graysons. That's a name I haven't heard in many years. What brings them to your attention?" Miss Marple reached into her bag and produced the photograph of Eleanor and Mr. Hargreaves. "I found this among some old letters buried in the churchyard. It seems Eleanor and our Mr. Hargreaves, Thomas, were once very close. Do you know what became of her?" The vicar sighed, his gaze fixed on the photograph. "It's a tragic story, I'm afraid. Eleanor was engaged to a man from a wealthy family, but she was deeply in love with Thomas. When her family discovered the affair, they were furious. They sent Thomas away and arranged for Eleanor to marry her fiancé. But on the eve of the wedding, she disappeared. Some say she ran away with Thomas, others that she took her own life. No one knows for certain." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "And the Graysons left the village soon after?" "Yes," the vicar replied. "They couldn't bear the scandal. They sold their estate and moved abroad. Thomas returned years later, but he was a changed man. He never spoke of Eleanor, and he lived a quiet, solitary life." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "And the locket? Did you know about it?" The vicar looked puzzled. "Locket? I'm afraid I don't know what you mean." Miss Marple reached into her bag again and produced the small, ornate locket she had found in the metal box. She opened it to reveal a tiny photograph of Eleanor on one side and a lock of hair on the other. "This was buried with the letters," she explained. "It seems Thomas kept it all these years." The vicar's expression softened. How very sad. He must have loved her deeply. Miss Marple's mind was racing. The locket, the letters, and the photograph all pointed to a love story that had ended in tragedy. But how did it connect to the present? And why had someone gone to such lengths to keep it hidden? As she left the vicarage, she noticed a figure watching her from the edge of the churchyard. The slight limp was unmistakable. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding. The mystery was closing in, and she knew she was running out of time. Chapter 9. A Dangerous Bloom. The Rose and Crown was a cosy establishment, its low-beamed ceilings and crackling fireplace giving it an air of timeless charm. Miss Marple stepped inside, the warmth of the pub a welcome contrast to the crisp autumn air. The usual patrons were scattered about, farmers discussing the harvest, shopkeepers sharing gossip, and a few solitary figures nursing pints in the corners. Miss Marple made her way to the bar, where the publican, Mr. Briggs, was polishing glasses with a well-worn cloth. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Miss Marple, what brings you here? Not your usual haunt, is it?" "No, indeed," she replied with a twinkle in her eye. "But I find myself in need of some local knowledge. Do you recall the Grayson family? They lived here many years ago." Mr. Briggs's expression darkened. "The Graysons? Aye, I remember them. Not much good came of that lot, if you ask me. Why do you want to know?" Miss Marple leaned in slightly, her voice low. "I've come across some old letters and a locket that belonged to Eleanor Grayson. It seems she was involved with our Mr. Hargreaves before she disappeared. I was hoping someone here might remember something about her, or the family's servants." Briggs glanced around the room, then motioned for her to follow him to a quieter corner. "Best not to speak too loudly about the Graysons," he said in a hushed tone. "There are still some who don't like to hear that name. But if it's information you're after, you might want to talk to old Ned. He worked for the Graysons as a stable hand back in the day. He's over there by the fire." Miss Marple thanked him and made her way to the fireplace, where an elderly man sat hunched in a chair, a pipe clenched between his teeth. His face was weathered, his hands gnarled from years of labour, but his eyes were sharp. "Good afternoon," Miss Marple said, seating herself beside him. "I'm told you once worked for the Graysons." Old Ned eyed her warily. "Aye, I did. What of it?" "I'm trying to piece together what happened to Eleanor Grayson," she explained. "I believe she was in love with Thomas Hargreaves. Do you remember anything about that?" The old man's expression softened, and he took a long draw from his pipe. "Eleanor. Now there was a lass. Sweet as a summer's day she was. But her family, they were a hard lot. When they found out about her and Thomas, they were furious. Sent him away they did and locked her up in the house. But she was clever. She got out the night before her wedding and ran off with Thomas, or so the story goes." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "And what do you think happened to her?" Old Ned hesitated, his gaze distant. "I think she met a bad end. The Graysons weren't the type to let a scandal ruin them, but I couldn't prove anything, and neither could anyone else." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "And the locket? Did you ever see her wear one?" The old man's eyes widened. "Aye, she had a locket. Her mother gave it to her, but she kept a picture of Thomas inside. She wore it every day right up until she disappeared." Miss Marple thanked him and rose to leave, her mind racing. The locket, the letters, and old Ned's story all pointed to a tragedy that had been buried for decades. But someone didn't want it to stay buried, and they were willing to kill to keep it hidden. As she stepped outside, she noticed a figure watching her from across the street. The slight limp was unmistakable. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding. The mystery was closing in, and she knew she was running out of time. Chapter 10. The Gardener's Last Secret. The Graysons' old estate loomed at the edge of the village, its once grand facade now crumbling and overtaken by ivy. The wrought-iron gates hung askew, their hinges rusted with age. Miss Marple pushed them open with a creak her footsteps crunching on the gravel drive as she made her way toward the house. The garden, once meticulously maintained, was a wild tangle of overgrown shrubs and weeds. Roses ran rampant, their thorny tendrils snaking across the path. Miss Marple paused, her eyes drawn to a patch of disturbed earth near a dilapidated greenhouse. The soil had been recently turned, and a faint coppery smell lingered in the air. She knelt, brushing away the loose dirt with her gloved hands. Beneath the surface, she found a small, rusted tin box. Inside was a collection of items: a faded handkerchief embroidered with the initials E.G., a broken pocket watch, and a folded piece of paper. The paper was a letter, its ink faded but still legible. It was addressed to Thomas Hargreaves and signed by Eleanor. "My dearest Thomas, I cannot bear the thought of a life without you. Meet me at the old greenhouse tonight. We will leave this place together, no matter the cost." Miss Marple's breath caught. This was the final piece of the puzzle. Eleanor had planned to run away with Thomas, but something had gone terribly wrong. As she stood, she noticed a shadow moving near the greenhouse. The figure was too far away to identify, but the slight limp was unmistakable. She hesitated, then called out, her voice steady. "There's no use hiding. I know you're there." The figure stepped into the light, and Miss Marple's eyes widened in surprise. It was Mrs. Henshaw, the vicar's housekeeper. Her usually neat appearance was dishevelled, and her hands trembled as she clutched a trowel. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you shouldn't have come here." "Why not?" Miss Marple asked, her tone calm but firm. "What are you hiding, Mrs. Henshaw?" The woman's face crumpled, and she sank to her knees. "It was an accident. I never meant for any of this to happen." Miss Marple stepped closer, her gaze steady. "Tell me the truth. What happened to Eleanor?" Mrs. Henshaw looked away, her voice trembling. "I was just a girl then, working as a maid for the Graysons. I overheard Eleanor and Thomas planning to run away. I thought if I told her parents, they would reward me. But when they confronted her, there was a struggle. Eleanor fell and hit her head. She was gone before anyone could help her." Miss Marple's heart ached at the tragedy, but her mind was already piecing together the rest. "And Thomas? What happened to him?" "He came that night, just as they'd planned," Mrs. Henshaw said, tears streaming down her face. "But when he found her, he couldn't bear it. He buried her here, in the garden she loved, and left the village. He only returned years later, a broken man." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "And the locket? The letters? Why bury them now?" Mrs. Henshaw shook her head. "I didn't bury them. That must have been Thomas. He must have wanted the truth to come out, even if he couldn't bring himself to tell it." Chapter 11. A Thorny Confession. The walk back to the village was tense, with Mrs. Henshaw clinging to Miss Marple's arm like a lifeline. The older woman's sobs had subsided into quiet sniffles, but her hands still trembled. Miss Marple, ever composed, kept a steady pace, her mind racing as she processed the revelations. "You must understand," Mrs. Henshaw said suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I was just a foolish girl, trying to curry favour with the Graysons. I didn't know it would end like this." Miss Marple patted her hand gently. "The past cannot be changed, my dear, but the present can still be set right. We must ensure that Eleanor's story is known, and that Thomas's name is cleared." Mrs. Henshaw nodded, though her face was pale with guilt. "But what about the other one? The one who's been following us? Do you think they know the truth?" Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "I believe they do, and I suspect they've been trying to protect the secret, or perhaps exploit it. We must be careful." As they approached the village square, Miss Marple noticed a figure slipping into the shadows near the churchyard. The slight limp was unmistakable. She quickened her pace, guiding Mrs. Henshaw toward the safety of the vicarage. "Stay here," she instructed once they reached the door. "Tell the vicar everything. I'll handle the rest." Mrs. Henshaw hesitated, her eyes wide with fear. "But what if they come after you?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Oh, I rather think they already have." With that, she turned and made her way toward the churchyard, her steps deliberate. The moon cast an eerie glow over the headstones, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth. She paused near the spot where she had found the metal box, her gaze sweeping the shadows. "You can come out now," she called, her voice calm but firm. "There's no use hiding." For a moment, there was only silence. Then a figure stepped into the moonlight. It was Dr. Cartwright, the village physician. His usual composed demeanour was gone, replaced by a look of desperation. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice tight, "you've been meddling in things that don't concern you." "No, the contrary," she replied, her tone mild. "I believe this concerns everyone in St. Mary Mead. Eleanor Grayson's death was a tragedy, but it's time the truth came to light." Dr. Cartwright's hands clenched into fists. "The truth! The truth will destroy this village. The Graysons were powerful people, and their secrets have kept this place safe for decades. If you expose them, it will ruin everything." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "And what of Thomas Hargreaves? He lived with the weight of this secret for years. Doesn't he deserve justice?" The doctor's expression faltered, and for a moment he looked almost ashamed. "Thomas, he was a good man, but some secrets are better left buried." "Not this one," Miss Marple said firmly. "Eleanor deserves to be remembered, and Thomas deserves to be free of the past." Dr. Cartwright sighed, his shoulders slumping. "You don't understand. The Graysons' legacy is tied to this village. If the truth comes out, it will tear us apart." Miss Marple stepped closer, her gaze steady. "The truth may be painful, but it is always better than a lie. And I believe the people of St. Mary Mead are stronger than you think." Chapter 12. Blood on the Petals. The village of St. Mary Mead awoke to an unusual stir the next morning. Word had spread quickly. Miss Marple had called a meeting at the village hall, and everyone was invited. The air was thick with curiosity and unease as villagers filed into the hall, their murmurs creating a low hum of anticipation. Miss Marple stood at the front of the room, her hands clasped neatly in front of her. Beside her sat Mrs. Henshaw, her face pale but resolute, and Dr. Cartwright, who looked as though he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Thank you all for coming," Miss Marple began, her voice calm but carrying. "I know this is unusual, But there is a matter that must be addressed, a matter that has been buried for far too long." The room fell silent as she began to recount the story of Eleanor Grayson and Thomas Hargreaves. She spoke of their love, the Graysons' disapproval, and the tragic night that had changed everything. She held up the locket, the letters and the photograph, each item a piece of the puzzle that had been hidden for decades. "Eleanor's death was not an accident," Miss Marple said, her gaze sweeping the room. "It was the result of a struggle born of fear and secrecy. And while those responsible are long gone, the truth remains. It is time for us to face it, no matter how painful it may be." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances, their whispers growing louder. Mrs. Price Ridley stood abruptly, her voice sharp. "And what good will this do?" stirring up old wounds. "The Graysons are gone, and so is Thomas. Why drag this into the light now?" Miss Marple's expression softened. "Because the truth matters. Because Eleanor deserves to be remembered, and Thomas deserves to be free of the shadow that has followed him all these years, and because secrets, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of resurfacing." Dr. Cartwright rose slowly, his face drawn. "Miss Marple is right. I've spent years trying to protect this village from the fallout of the Graysons' secrets, but I see now that I was wrong. The truth may be painful, but it is the only way to heal." The room fell silent once more, the weight of his words settling over the crowd. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze steady. Eleanor's story is a reminder of the cost of secrecy and the power of love. Let us honour her memory by facing the truth with courage and compassion. As the meeting adjourned, the villagers filed out of the hall, their conversations hushed but thoughtful. Miss Marple watched them go, her heart heavy but hopeful. The mystery had been solved, but its impact would linger, a reminder of the fragility of human nature and the resilience of the human spirit. Epilogue. Later that evening, Miss Marple returned to her rose garden. The crimson glory bushes were in full bloom, their petals a vibrant red against the fading light. She knelt beside the spot where she had found the blood-stained glove, her fingers brushing the soil. "Rest now, Eleanor," she murmured. "Your story is known, and your love will not be forgotten." As she rose, she noticed a single red rose lying on the garden bench. Beside it was a note, written in a familiar hand. "Thank you, Miss Marple, for everything." She smiled faintly, her heart lifting. The mystery was over, but the roses would continue to bloom, their beauty a testament to the enduring power of truth and love.